Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues, and with this video, I'll be discussing my thoughts on episode 11 of the anime series Psycho-Pass 2. For all intents and purposes, the season finale of the second season of Psycho-Pass. And I like how this one wrapped up. You know, basically, we're picking up right where we left off with that trifecta face-off of Akane, Kamui, and effectively Tagane. And I love how, in the thick of it, you know, basically Tagane is thinking on his feet. He grabs Akane and tries to get her in the way of Kamui's domination. And this completely throws a wrench in the works for a time, where Akane then later gets the upper hand and basically handcuffs Tagane to a pipe, decides to lead Kamui down into the heart, the bowels of the Sibyl system itself, the brain center or nerve center of this entire hub and everything like that. And I like that Akane is very much, you know, forthright in the fact that she doesn't believe Kamui is the one who actually kidnapped and murdered subsequently her grandmother. She basically is of the opinion it must have been Tagane, or at least Tagane had his hands in it, and that ends up, you know, proving to be true. We as viewers already know this to be true, and so it's very, you know, interesting to find out that Akane has also come to this conclusion. We're not exactly sure, you know, what threads she's been picking at that lead her to believe this, but she does. She knows it wholeheartedly. I think it maybe calls back to Kisei, aka Mama Tagane, rubbing it in her face in the previous episode, and as she basically brings Kamui down to the heart of the Sibyl system, I love that we're seeing all of the different personalities, you know, in a sort of holographic yet physical form, calling back to each segment of his mind that is actually speaking at any given moment, because he is an amalgamated person. You know, each segment of his brain represents the last surviving consciousness, I guess you could say, or shards of consciousnesses of the people who died in the plane crash that, you know, almost claimed Kamui's life as well. By leading Kamui down here, we see that, you know, Kisei, Mama Tagane, aka in the form of Chief Kisei, is very much not wanting Kamui to be able to progress too much further. She tries to stand in the way of both Akane and Kamui, you know, brandishing her own dominator, and he ends up turning the tables by going and you know, basically casting his questioning directly to the Sibyl system itself. You know, what color are you, Sibyl? Can you judge us freely? Can you actually stand and you know, stand by and let this happen? What Kisei and Mama Tagane has been doing, all this kind of stuff. And the challenge is answered with Kamui's own dominator seeing that the Psycho-Pass levels of Kisei herself, or at least Mama Tagane's soul, her brain, the mechanism that, you know, represents her essence within the Sibyl system core, it's skyrocketed. So he basically has lethal enforcement take effect, and he wipes out Mama Tagane for all intents and purposes, one fell swoop. And this continues as they actually have a face-to-face with the Sibyl system. The Sibyl system is basically telling both Akane and Kamui, as they're confronting each other, that they've taken into consideration what Akane and what Kamui have been saying about having to judge the many myriad brains that are making up the mechanism, the heart and the thought process and the processing mechanisms, all of that, the asymptomatic criminals and all that kind of stuff that fuels this whole organized way of trying to keep society in check, all of that good stuff. It has to call itself into question, which is exactly what Akane had in the previous episode threatened was going to be the case, and I think maybe even a couple episodes previous. And so we see that the Sibyl system, at least to me, very shockingly and very surprisingly, decides to do away with the most problematic brains in that framework, whichever ones would lead to a Psycho-Pass reading at all. They are effectively disintegrated in front of Akane and Kamui, thus turning the tables once again on Kamui himself. Now basically he can be read. If Sibyl can recognize the threat elements within itself, basically he becomes subject to Sibyl's judgment system. And Akane has her dominator out right away, pointed right at him. You know, she's going to basically take him into custody. And all the while we're seeing that Tagane, who's been, you know, chained to that pipe all the way back at the other end of the, you know, the whole corridor, underground layer, whatever you want to call it, he's basically taken to chopping off his own hand to be able to get out of the handcuffs and chase after Kamui and Akane, and he's just livid. He completely has a psychotic breakdown when he finds the body of Chief Kasei, formerly, Mama Tagane, and it's very intriguing to me that when he catches up to Kamui and Akane, of course, the Dominators are drawn, and you have both men effectively pointing their Dominators at each other. You would have thought Tagane would actually have gone for Akane first, but that isn't the case, and we end up seeing in this finale, sequence, basically Kamui is disintegrated right in front of Akane's eyes. We have them both firing their Dominators at once, but Kamui's was not, marked for lethal enforcement, or he didn't hit, Tagane in the right way. Tagane did not die right off the bat, explode, like, is what happened to Kamui and such like that. But, Tagane does eventually pack it in, and we see Mika actually, he's challenging her and ordering her once again to meet up with him and all this kind of stuff. And she's having a mental breakdown. I mean, her character, it's very much on the opposite end of the spectrum this whole season, and not anywhere near the direction I thought her character was meant to go, in that she's totally turned herself over of life and limb, of whim, and all these kinds of things, of self-thought, to the Sybil system. She's become an idolater to it and given herself over to it completely. And even in the finale, I thought her character could potentially be redeemed to some effect if maybe she did, as, we thought she was going to do. She pulled out her own Dominator. It was set to lethal enforcement. She was going to potentially destroy Tagane right there in front of her. And she even backed out of that. She's like, this is what will clear my hue coloring and everything like that. It will keep it crystal clear if I be rid of this, deterrent to my life, the positivity of my life and all this stuff, the acceptance of the system. And this is where she just has that fanatical turn. She completely turns the Dominator off and rather just sort of lets him wither away and die right there in front of her, casting her own self-judgment on the things that she has done, having worked with Tagane, even, at arm's length as she did. She didn't actually full-on become a villain, per se, like Tagane was, and Mama Tagane was, and even Kamui was, for a point, for a time in any case. But it's intriguing to me that the only sort of, justification and judgment that will come for her is upon herself. Unless we continue into a third season where, Yayoi and other characters uncover her sort of less than stellar, actions in tandem with Tagane and such like that. And I like how we get little hints of that where it's almost as though Yayoi has her suspicions. She basically tells Mika bold-faced, if we ever find out who leaked the information of Akane's grandmother's whereabouts to Tagane, they will never be forgiven, and basically Mika says very much the same thing. We know that Mika's thinking, I will never be able to forgive myself. She had already said that in the episode, but you've got Yayoi there, and I'm just suspecting that maybe she has an inkling, that this girl who she was like sort of a mentor toward, much more than Akane. I mean, the relationship between Mika and Akane were adversarial all the way through this season, but with Yayoi, she was really the first one that put her arm around Mika going back to the first season. So you think that basically Mika would go to her or maybe confide in her, but there is going to be a divide if this ever picks up in another season between those two characters, and that's exciting to me because, as I say, it was completely misdirected from where I thought it would go, the sort of overarching story for the Mika character. And in the end, of course, we have Akane still keeping her hue crystal clear. It's absolutely amazing to me, given all the circumstances, even being confronted with Tagane's taunts about her grandmother, about killing her grandmother, and how she put up a fight and she was screaming Akane's name and all this stuff, taunting her, jabbing at her, trying to make her psychopath or hue coloring black, as he basically said was his goal all along when he finally did admit to it. And it's interesting to me that she's basically clear. She can confront Kasei, the newly embodied Kasei, whoever's mind is actually the voice output now for the Sybil system remains to be seen, but Mama Tagane, we know, has been destroyed effectively, and so you have this new Kasei who's like, you know what? Everything you've done here, bringing Kamui down and having us confront him and evolving this Sybil system to not only be restricted to individual psychopath levels, but group levels, sort of on a societal level, how positive or negative is society at large, not down to the individual. how capable of judgment are they? How capable of criminal acts are they? If everyone's hue colors are primarily clear and there is no sort of asymptomatic, criminal element, well, how exactly are you going to go about, judging society? You may find if one bad apple crops up, you'll have a massacre on your hands, is what Kasei is telling Akane, and she's rubbing it in her face. This is something you brought about by bringing Kamui down here, having us confront him and everything like that. And Akane, as sure as ever, as sure in herself, as well as society, as well as human beings and individuals, she's proud to say, in the face of Kasei, in the face of civil system itself, that she believes it is humanity who controls society, and it shouldn't be society who controls the individual. Very much a great aesthetic for the real world, when it comes to the government, when it comes to all the governments of the world, and society at large. You have to be an individual, you have to be yourself, and we as a people can collectively move and shake mountains, if we know how to do it the right way, that kind of thing. And that's Akane's stance by the end. She has gotten the upper hand. She has seen Kamui's sort of challenge to the civil system, which she, I guess, falls in line with, to a large degree in her own mind, while also still erring on the side of justice, which is something Kamui even challenges her on and asks her about. You could have taken more criminal lines and less justifiable in the annals of justice avenues in pursuing the courses you have and everything like that. And Connie's like, no, that's never going to be an option for me. And so we see she is an honorable character. She's a forthright character. She has grown the utmost out of all other characters in a lot of ways. Even though we were following Tagane and we were following Kamui and Mika and all these other characters, seeing Shisui finally being taken into custody and bested by Gino and everything like that, it really was a Kane series to see that she really has grown. This was really a step-by-step look to see how far she's come since her being very green at the start of the first season. And I gotta say, there are a lot of elements of this season 2 of Psycho Pass that I really liked a lot more than the first season. I loved the first season for its depth and its length, but I like that this season was able to basically bring a lot of those same kinds of elements in and did it in half the time. And but it still feels like we've been watching a whole 25, 26 episode season, at least to me. And I thought it was absolutely incredible. I enjoyed the hell out of Psycho Pass 2. I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought about the wrapping up. I love the metaphor, by the way, at the very end, after the end credits, of Akane going back to her empty apartment or whatever it is and putting out a unlit cigarette in an ashtray, because now she doesn't need the guidance of Kagame anymore. She doesn't need to have that mentality guiding her and giving her answers and leading her in the direction of clues and, Saigajuji and everything like that. She's been able to overcome this all herself. And now she has found herself by the end and basically tamping out an unlit cigarette, meaning that, she doesn't need the smoke. She doesn't need the comfort of thinking of this other person who could guide her and make her think more fluidly. She's able to do that herself now. And it's also a metaphor for, case closed, effectively. The Kamui case is done, it's over with, and we won the day, is Akane's stance. So I can't wait to see how we follow up with the Psycho Pass movie that's supposed to be out in January, maybe a little bit later, online for people to view and such like that. But we know that, Akane's once again center stage in that. Hopefully we'll get to see more Kagame in that, being that he was only, sort of a ghostly apparition, a product of Akane's mind all through Psycho Pass 2 this season. But yeah, I enjoyed the hell out of it, and I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below what you thought of Psycho Pass 2, the entirety of the season as compared to the first, on its own haunches. Did you think it held up well enough, and were you enthralled by it, the twists and turns in the story and everything like that? Definitely a hell of a watch, I gotta say, and I really loved the pacing of it. And I think they got a lot done in much less time than the first season did, and for me, that's bonus points, that's pluses. So yeah, otherwise I hope you enjoyed the video and that it finds you well, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.